hate when it does that. All right, and so in the communist situation, from a communist standpoint, we're very different from that. We are in form of ownership or property or business, we don't want the state to own everything. If the state owns everything, then who is rich? The state. And the people who work for the government will usually have the money. You don't have free enterprise. You can't just say, okay, I want to open up a taco place, or I want to open up a hamburger place, or I want to open up a business place, because the state basically owns it. This was worldwide workers' revolution that would eventually overthrow capitalistic systems and abolish private property. So they are trying to abolish private property in the entire world. Less than 0.1% of Americans joined the new Communist Party in the U.S. That equated to about 70,000 Americans. So we were scared of communism. And the Russians they became communists as well. But basically, communism is kind of a new thing. It didn't actually start until the Russians, about 1917. And then in about 1945, 1950 is when China went to communism. So they haven't had a lot of communist countries, but it has brought a lot of intrepidation to other people because of it.
How long has Putin been
Putin started like in 99 and 2000. You see, somewhere there. Before 2000, he was for a year. And then for the last 20 years, he's been like 16 of the years. So he's been in power for like 17 years. He's supposedly worth several $100 million. All right, so when we talk about communism, you always see red. You know, you saw the symbol before, but if there's a color that represents something, red is the color that represents communism. So the Red Scare was a term to use the hysteria and the fear of communism in the United States. That's all you need to have in there. You don't have to write any of this other stuff. But the Red Scare was us in the United States fearing communism was going to take over. Term came from a common nickname for communists, which is Reds, because of their loyalty to the red Soviet Union flag, which we saw before. Number of radicals were small, but still caused uproar. Possibility of governmental control and threat to private property eliminated and left most U.S. citizens terrified. Both the public and the government were sure that radicals were undermining American values. So they thought there were all these people in this Red Scare going behind everybody going, hey, and they thought they were trying to influence people. Realistically, there were some people, but most people don't. It's not like most people just want to become communists. They might want to become socialists where you get more benefits. With socialism, you can still have private property, but you're like given free medical, free college, stuff like that. But a lot of people don't go as radical as communism.
in Germany?
Oh no, Hitler hated communists.
That was a dictatorship, right?
Yes, or a dictatorship, but authoritarian leadership. But dictatorship falls under that, yes. All right. Justice Department, later named FBI, formed an anti-radical division led by J. Edgar Hoover. So this is important. This guy's pretty important to know. J. Edgar Hoover was the leader of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover. Can you see it? So he was in charge of getting the commies, and unfortunately he tried to take down a lot of people who weren't communists. So if you even had the notion that someone told on you and said, "Oh, Jake's a communist," then they could actually bring you in, and they could basically ruin you in the United States because of someone's assumption that, well, who you are, what you do. Now, if you sign paperwork that you joined the Communist Party, then obviously at that point you were out of luck. But it wasn't very fair in the treatment of them, because we have the ability to believe what we want to believe, as long as it's not hurting anybody. But J. Edgar Hoover, they call him Hoover boys who work for him. He was over the FBI. He's a very important person. You'll probably see that. But the biggest thing you ever know, if you see J. Edgar Hoover, FBI. And you'll figure it out. Basically, I don't need any of that stuff. Nah.
What? How do you call you?
Oh, it's her?
No, I don't want that. The Red Scare and the KKK. So, the KKK, do they still exist?
Yes.
They do, but it's got smaller than it was before. So, the KKK still exists, but they're a lot smaller. Mostly what the KKK has become is white supremacist groups. And that's what we have today, is mostly white supremacists. But in the beginning, in the 1870s, the KKK is when they started. They were a very dominant group. And basically the KKK, what they tried to do, once you get through all this, is they tried and attempted to stop black people from voting. Now, we've talked about this before. If I stop a majority of the people in a community, like say Pleasanton was mostly black, and there were some leaders that were mainly white, and they ran the county for a long time. All of a sudden, you have all these black voters who have the ability to vote. They can change things. So obviously the white people there didn't want things to change. And so that's kind of how the KKK came about. They wanted to stop voting. They wanted to hinder voting, and so that things would stay the same. They had the tendency to use violence. I don't know if you've ever seen where they would burn crosses. They would put a cross in your feet. If they didn't believe what you had to say, or
They put in trees.
they hung people. They burned crosses in your yards. They were very violent. They blew up churches. They were a very violent group. And they walk around in their little funny costumes.
Their white hoods.
Their white hoods. Like no one knew who they were. But they did do that. But the Klan's influence has really died down in the last 30 or 40 years. But it has been picked up with white supremacist groups who have some of the same thought processes. It's about voting. It's about keeping the white race, not diluting it through intermarriage with other minorities or anything like that. They kind of got a strange thought of how the world should work. And they're still pretty prevalent. I mean, during some of these rallies and stuff like that, they have shown up.
Yes.
Anti-Semitism. Basically, this is anti-Jew.
Hitler. No.
Well, basically, but there was a lot of people who didn't like Jewish people from the beginning. But in this, you do need to know, anti-Semitism means you're against Jewish people. And it could be for many different reasons. Some people thought they took money from them, or they took business, or they controlled stuff behind the scenes, or some people it goes back to as far as Christ getting crucified. There's just been the whole different things of why people don't like Jewish people. And most of the time it's because a person who's scared of another minority actually has an inferiority complex, meaning they feel less than the minority that they're trying to say is less. This is a bad picture because you can see once again, we've seen black people lynched and stuff like that in the United States, but in other countries, they were also lynching Jewish. So all you got to do is be Jewish. And Jewish is kind of interesting because you don't have to be born Jewish. And back then, it's still hard in religion kind that's like one of the few that's like, if you're black or you're white, you're black or you're white. If you're Jewish, it's almost like being black or white. You're born into it. So, but you can also join it. Like you can convert to Judaism. Like Trump's daughter and her husband she converted to Judaism. Trump's not Jewish, but his daughter and his grandkids are because they converted to it. And so you can be through conversion, but in most places, like if you're a Catholic, that's not considered like your ethnicity. It's not considered like if you were black or white. Jewish, it's almost seen like a race as well, which is kind of interesting.
You got black, you got white, you got Jews.
So, what time is it? All right. The K shows its power and strength by organizing in March and December 1925. You really don't need anything off this. You just need to know that the Klan did have power. Obviously, they did have numbers. So 50,000 people marching. So that's a lot of people who have a lot of hate in them. So, but you don't need to write anything down about that slide.
Is the bitch for meat not?
Ku Klux Klan, we've talked about them.
The
The Klansman Creed, what is this?
I believe in God and.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a Klansman Creed. So this is what you believe in if you're a Klansman. I believe in God and the tenets of the Christian religion, and that a godless nation cannot long prosper. I believe that church is not grounded in the principles of morality, and justice is a mockery of God and to man. I believe that a church does not have the welfare of the common people at heart is unworthy. I believe in the eternal separation of church and state, which means government can't be run by the church. I hold no allegiances to any foreign governors, emperors, kings, pope, or other foreign political or religious powers. I hold my allegiance to the state, stars and stripes, next to my allegiance to God alone. I believe in just laws and liberty. I believe in upholding the Constitution of the United States. So they believe in free speech, they believe in freedom of press, they believe in law and order, but they believe in upholding the Constitution, which is kind of a misnomer because they're breaking the law and they're breaking constitutional life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness because of the fact that they are being prejudiced and racist against Jewish people, black people, Catholics, you name it.
Black, white, Jew.
Let's see. I don't really care about Willie Hardin.
Hitler.
I don't really care about these guys. The Golden 20s. This will be the last slide.
Alright.
So the Golden 20s, and we were talking about why it was such a cool era. Well, because
Cars.
industrial production rose 30%. So the GNP, the gross national product, which means how much a country like produces, went up from 74 billion to 104 billion. The average income rose a third, which is huge. If your average income rises a third a year, that's tremendous. And Henry Ford assembly line, affordable cars for the masses. So to make this in a nutshell, you had a car, you had money, you had a place to go to spend that money, and life was good. The only thing that didn't work for people that you couldn't technically drink legally, so they went to these bars and clubs, listened to some jazz, spent some money, and did a lot of dancing. So that's the Golden 20s. We'll finish more of it when we come back on Monday. So close your books if you would.
Yeah.